Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, December 6th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. As we approach the end of the year, the holiday season, the season of giving, I'm coming to you today for the first of many appeals through the end of the year to ask you if you would find it in your heart to find a place for commentary as part of your year-end giving. Commentary is a 501c3 nonprofit. We depend not only on our subscribers and on our advertisers for keeping the lights on and being able to continue to do this podcast, but donors are a vital component to keeping the institution strong and healthy. We are approaching our 80th year in publication. Next November will be 80 years. The commentary will have been in continuous publication, making it, this is actually the case, one of the oldest monthlies still publishing in the Western world. We publish an issue every month. That issue is available to you online, as our January issue will be available to you online next week with a lot of wonderful stuff in it. We, of course, also publish our blog every day, and we do these podcasts, and that is not a cheap proposition. People have been extraordinarily generous over the years. I encourage you and prospectively thank you for the kinds of generosity that our listeners and viewers and readers have shown over the years, and ask that this year you dig a little deeper to keep us going at this critical moment. You can go to commentary.org/donate. Very simple, one-stop shopping, one page right there. And we will all be very, very grateful for your eleemosynary generosity. And by we, I mean Executive Editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior Editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Media Commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
Talked about this yesterday, but I can't get over it. I can't get over it, so we got to talk about it again today. Piece in the New York Times about how people in the Biden administration are seriously talking about blanket pardons for people who have been threatened over the years by Trumpy people with being pursued once Trump people got back into power with destruction. They're going to destroy them. They're going to use the tools of power to deal with them. They're going to get them arrested. They're going to go after journalists. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. A lot of this is now focusing on Kash Patel, the purported nominee for FBI. I mean, I guess he's it's not even formal yet, and the FBI director is still there. It's all very unclear, but Kash Patel is somebody who wandered around on Steve Bannon's podcast and other places saying things like, I will avenge you, and we will take the hammer of Thor and smash you to bits and whatever. And the response of people in the administration, people in the press, and others to these threats has been this idea that there need to be preemptive pardons of, it could be hundreds of people the way they're talking. From Republicans like Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney to Democrats like, I don't know, what journalists are on the enemies list or whatever. And the reason I wanted to talk about this again today is that they invented all this in 2015 and 2016 with the unprecedented emergence of Trump as a candidate who said and did things that, frankly, no American candidate had ever said and done before. Said he wouldn't respect the results of the election. Said he didn't like, he didn't like people who crashed their planes in war. Said, he would lock her up. All that stuff. That beginning in 2016, beginning with the Crossfire Hurricane investigation that started in July of 2016, the Democratic Party, officials in the Democratic Party, people in the press aligned with the interests of Democrats and liberals, terrified, and I think without genuinely terrified by the prospect of Trump, who does not seem to observe democratic niceties, coming to power, began thinking that it was okay to use the levers of power that they possessed to find ways to prevent him from rising, or once he won the election in 2016, to prevent him from assuming the White House. And then once he assumed the White House, to figure out ways to get him out of the White House as quickly as possible before 2020 rolled around. So we had leaks against his incoming national security advisor. We had James Comey, the FBI director, playing this inside-outside game where he went to Trump to warn him that there were efforts to undermine his incoming administration as an effort to test Trump, the FBI director who was going to work for him, to test Trump to see how he would react when Comey came to him with this news, not because he thought it was important that Trump know, but because he was trying to smoke him out, catch him in a perjury trap, get him before January 20th, take him down. And we had 25th Amendment talk, and we had 3 years of efforts unprecedented in American history of one party and its affiliated press believing that it had the right to violate rules of FISA courts, to use double-barreled information, getting a FISA warrant on the basis of the evidence that was in the FISA warrant that got the first FISA warrant for the second FISA warrant against a poor schlep who wasn't even on the campaign or being paid by the campaign. That's Carter Page, throwing somebody named George Papadopoulos in jail for 14 days for, I don't even know what he did. He had a drunken conversation at a bar in London with somebody who then ratted him out in some fashion for saying something or other. They did all this. They did it. Republicans didn't do it. Trump didn't do it. They did it.
And then this is without even getting into what Trump was subjected to after office.
Right. I'm right. So I'm only beginning with this part. So my point is not, when I think about friends of mine like David Frum and others like that saying, there are no guardrails. The guardrails only exist if everybody agrees that there are guardrails. Trump says there are no guardrails, so there are no guardrails. So the implicit, the implicit logical follow-on from that is he's gotten rid of the guardrails. So you got to set a thief to catch a thief. If he's going to play dirty, we have to play dirty.
But this is where this reminds me more of the Harry Reid nuking the filibuster story and trajectory, and than it does this, because they actually removed the guardrails on presidential pardons by basically accepting with very little pushback Biden's blanket pardon of his son. And it's not just that he lied and said he wouldn't pardon him, but it's the blanket nature of it. It's covering almost 11 years. And that is unprecedented. And so once you've done that and accepted that that was necessary, then it's just one step further to say, let's just preemptively pardon anyone who might be at risk of being prosecuted for things they did that they shouldn't have under Trump. But the preemptive nature of it is also fascinating, because blanket pardons do exist. They tend to be used as a sort of tool of reconciliation for people who have admitted guilt or been prosecuted, for a crime that then later a society decides we need some sort of healing on, whether that's draft dodgers en masse, large groups of people who've done something that later on the country decides this is too divisive. We're gonna fix this. But they have admitted guilt in some cases. They've served time in most cases for and then they receive the pardon. This is quite different. This is a form of insurance for people who work for Democratic administrations. It's saying, whatever you do during a president's administration, we're going to protect you on our way out. It's opening a door, which of course Trump will walk right through, because why wouldn't he? It's opening a door to allow any incoming administration to have this form of insurance, which would allow people who work for that administration to assume a kind of reckless posture with regard to following the rule of law.
See, I think it's very worthwhile that we're talking about it today, because I think the story's changed a bit since yesterday in a kind of subtle way. Yesterday, kind of all we knew was Politico had reported that the administration was talking about this preemptive pardon. Supposedly, Biden wasn't aware of it yet. And it came right on the heels of the Hunter broad pardon, which a lot of Democrats were distressed about and the media was distressed about. But today you have Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times in favor of it. Today's beginning the sort of normalization of it, the acceptance of it. And aside from that being a bad thing in and of itself, it tells me that liberals are right off the bat not ingesting any of the lessons of the 2024 election. The main one being the American people don't want your hysteria. Stop. Take a breath. Keep, as John says, keep your powder dry.
I think, Seth, Abe brings up an important thing, and we talked about this during 2024, and there was this subtle shift. For 8 years, Trump was the disruptive X factor, abnormal presence in American political life. Behaved in new ways, did new things. A lot of people liked it. A lot of people were extraordinarily unnerved by it. Then we had this once in a century pandemic crisis that seemed ill-suited to disruption and breaking. You know, that what you needed was somebody calming and soothing and seeming to be in control and cool and collected, because we were in the crisis, and he failed at that. And Biden said, I'm normal, and went. And then there was this flip in 2023, 2024, in which over the course of those 18 months, really, Trump started seeming the more normal of the two candidates, and the Republican platform started seeming the more normal of the two approaches to what the future would be. It wasn't a senile guy. It wasn't a swap out with no vote of a candidate. It wasn't boys should play in girls' sports. It wasn't 15,000 other things. Trump was there for they, them. I'm for you. I don't like all of this crime coming over the border. You know, your taxes are too high. Inflation is too high. I'm gonna try to fix things and make them better. That's a normal political message, right? So as Abe says, they win, the Republicans win the election, and the Democrats say, fascism is upon us. We better pardon ourselves.
Right. And it's continuing also in a funny way because during the transition, we don't have a president who's, really all there. And Kamala, I think everybody's a bit surprised by just how much she has disappeared. She made that one video, it was a disaster, and she's been hidden away.
Well, you call it a disaster. I could watch it on a loop 24 hours a day.
Fair enough. She's, the president's being hidden in the attic and the vice president's being hidden in the basement. There's something very weird about that situation.
Are you calling Africa an attic? Seriously, they sent him to Africa so they wouldn't have to put him in the attic.
Angola. The Angola exit, as Christine said the other day. And so Trump, he has this press conference about Canada with Justin Trudeau and says, well, Justin, you could be governor, we'll make Canada the 51st state and you could be governor or whatever. And you realize that he's sort of doing the job of a president at a time when normally you get yelled at for that. Normally there's an objection that is we have one president at a time. But there's a sort of weird sense of relief, I think, on the part of the public that this only feels normal right now because Trump is stepping into the I'm the leader vacuum that has been left. And it's not normal to just leave a vacuum. It's not normal to push a president off a ticket because they are past the point where they can handle the job and then just stick it out and wait until there's a new administration with that thought going around in people's head. There really is. So I think that the normalcy thing has been to Trump's benefit, and they do keep going with it. And the other thing, by the way, I just want to about the cyclical nature of the freak out, normalization, whatever cycle that the Democrats have been doing. With the FBI, what was George Papadopoulos indicted for? What did he get in trouble for? Lying to the FBI. What did Michael Flynn get indicted for? Lying to the FBI. So it's not just that they find a way to prosecute you, it's that they find an excuse for the FBI to talk to you, and then they charge you for talking to the FBI and put you in jail. And then Trump has to pardon you because your crime was the FBI didn't think you were honest enough in their interrogation of you during a trumped up investigation that had basically no basis. And then on the basis of those pardons, it's all right, well, the door is open. We got to pardon everybody. Pardoning is normal now because he's going to pardon somebody for lying to the FBI. And I think that's an important part of this, is that it's the investigation itself sends you to jail. What you do during the investigation.
There's also a certain comfort level, I think, that the Democratic Party has now with running that Trump playbook, exactly as Seth describes, like having something to point to and say, danger, danger, Will Robinson. Because what they're not doing, and this points to another piece in the Times today that I found sort of fascinating, they're not dealing with the fact that on the many of the issues that this election was about, he also has the public on his side. So there's a piece that says, Trump better be careful. He doesn't have a mandate. And that's true. And actually, that was a warning that people on the right side of the aisle gave the Biden administration early on, which he did not heed. So it's true that he doesn't have a mandate in the way we think of a landslide. But then when you break out on a lot of the issues, the economy, crime, the border, all those three in particular, a lot of the social issues like the trans issue, most of the people who voted for Trump, that they're on the right side of the aisle on a lot of those issues. The Democratic Party is really wrestling with why they couldn't persuade people that they represent their interests. And it's much easier to point and yell at Trump and go, he's a fascist, he's going to do all these terrible things, we live in fear, than it is to sit down and wrestle in the party about the trans issue, which we had another little stunt performed on Capitol Hill yesterday in the bathrooms where we just want to all be accepted as part of society, turned into a TikTok video of people gyrating and twerking in the women's restroom in Congress to prove that men should be allowed in women's restrooms. So they really are having a crisis on the issues as much as they are in the crisis and the void of leadership in the party.
It's totally linked. Can I just say it's the fact that Bradley Manning, and I'm calling him Bradley Manning because he's a traitor to the United States. I don't give traitors to the United States their preferred pronouns and their preferred names. And by the way, he should still be in jail, except Obama commuted his sentence. He was supposed to be there for 30 years.
That's a father's love, though.
Yeah, the fact that there was a few days ago that in the New York Times there was a piece saying, maybe we should acknowledge that some of the trans activism has gone a little too far for the general public. And even though our cause is righteous, we shouldn't have been as aggressive. Shouldn't have harassed J.K. Rowling and so on, right? Then, boom! Yesterday, there's a trans dance party in the bathroom of Capitol Hill. This is the exact same issue. They have no idea how much the public has rejected their agenda.
They do or they don't care. I mean, the best way of looking at it is there are a bunch of people who are normal political players of a classic mold in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. That is to say, they're operatives, their purpose is to win elections. What they do is try to figure out how to get to 50+1 vote to win an election. So they look at issues, they do it almost like a marketing campaign. What would be most palatable? What ingredient do you need to leave out because it's too spicy? Try to sell it that way. And that's, sort of like the common run of politics in the world are those people. And they're looking at the election and saying, okay, we better rejigger. It's bad. Boys and girls sports, that's bad. That's bad. Trust me, You can go to a town in Massachusetts. You can go to a town in Mississippi. You can go to a town in Alaska. You can go to a town anywhere. People do not want 6'2" boys, playing volleyball and smashing a ball into their daughter's head, spiking it into their head and breaking her nose. Like, that's not right. So why don't we get rid of that? Okay. Then you have the other people who are like, I don't care what they think. I don't care if they think it's not fair that he's 6'2" and spiking the ball in the girl's nose. Would you say that about Rosa Parks? Could Rosa Parks spike a ball in a white person's nose? Yes. Rosa Parks should have been allowed to do that. This is what you're allowed to do. Don't hand me your cynical, craven, nihilistic efforts to win elections at all costs. We're playing for the future of humanity, and we outrank you, and we are morally superior to you. And Democrats, it appears, have very little immunity from that assault on the very conventional notion that we're all Democrats. You know what we need? We need 220 seats in the House, 51 senators, and we need to win 271 electoral votes so that we can do things that we like to do, like get more health care and provide more benefits and do whatever we want to do. And that's the normal thing.
But it's understandable from the perspective of the more radical elements, because there's now the moral grandstanding brings them huge rewards, not electorally, but in terms of popularity, in terms of the culture, which is more on their side than not, although that is shifting. And I think they are not performing for the constituents of the average Democrat who's elected to the House of Representatives. They're performing for the followers on TikTok and Instagram, and they get immediate reward for that. And they get Hollywood, making film after film that features a trans star and saying, this is the future. Moral grandstanding brings a really strong sense of self to people who don't otherwise have any kind of faith or religion or purpose. And you see it in a lot of the more extreme parts of MAGA too, but this is where you really see it on the left. And I think they, in the sense that they don't care, you're right, but they're also being rewarded by a culture that has a different system for rewarding old school politicians and new school activists.
Go ahead. I just want to say, I think that the trans stunt kind of reignites a disagreement that we've had in this podcast about Nancy Mace and how she went about in a very performative, theatrical way, putting up signs saying,
girls only, or
girls only bathroom account. Yeah. And Christine and I were saying that was the wrong way to go about it. And John, you and Matt were saying it was right. Now, I have to say, I think she invited this to some degree, which isn't to say it may not have happened without her doing that, but I think she hastened it. What I'm now wondering, though, is that good or bad? Because she hastened the thing, as Nancy Mace made the point herself yesterday on X, on a post about this stunt in the bathrooms, the Bradley Manning stunt. She said something to the effect of, "They're proving a point, all right. They're proving our point." So maybe inviting the radical craziness so the world can see it is a win. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, look, that's a classic dynamic in 60s and post-60s American politics. You're the Chicago 7, you're in a courtroom, and you behave in ways with this irascible 83-year-old judge that ends up having you gagged and roped to a chair in the course of your trial. You did that on purpose. You wanted to turn the courtroom into a mockery of a courtroom and have the country look at your trial and say, this country is a mockery of itself. And you pushed Judge Hoffman's buttons, and Judge Hoffman responded, and we had the trial, this notorious trial of Chicago 7. It's performative politics, and it's been going on. That was really the high watermark of it in the 1960s. It's been going on forever. you draw fire, right? And then you say, oh my God, they're shooting at me. How could they? It's like, here, shoot at me. And then they shoot at you. And you're like, oh my God, they're shooting at me. How could they possibly do that? It's a form of complex gaslighting. So in 2016, Amanda Carpenter, other people, I think very fairly made the point that the Trump campaign and the Trump administration were creating new forms of gaslighting the public. That they were saying things that we knew visibly not to be true, that Trump insisted that his staff echo in order to create, what was it that Steve Jobs called it, a reality distortion field? Just the assertion of something so vividly that you gave people leave to agree with you that something that actually wasn't there in front of you was there in front of you. So largest crowd size in American history for actually relatively sparsely attended inaugural and that sort of thing. And then the word gaslighting entered the vocabulary again after decades of misuse. But they did it, and it was a thing, and it was very disturbing. And it was a disturbing thing to enter into American politics. But there has been no gaslighting like liberal gaslighting for the last 4 years. I am sorry. You indict Donald Trump on 34 charges of writing the same check every month just so you can get to 34 felony indictments, a check where he legitimately is allowed to make a deal paying somebody off, the claim being that the check somehow was illegitimately written off the wrong account. Yeah, so you get a quiescent jury to agree to it. That was gaslighting. That's gaslighting. It was one thing. It was one check. It was one payment 34 times. So you indict him for 34 times. You get 91 indictments out of everything. Why? Because you're throwing the kitchen sink at it. Why? Because your goal is to say he was indicted 91 times. It's not to say that he was guilty. It's not to say that he was innocent. It is to create the conditions under which he cannot be reelected by using means and techniques that should not be used in American politics, namely lawfare. This is the banana republic that we were being warned that Donald Trump was introducing into the United States, and showed some signs of it. The pardon games that he played in the first year of his administration, where he would sort of like give out fun pardons and stuff like that.
The election denial lawsuits, those were another
Very,
example
very,
of that.
I am not excusing, the contribution to the degeneration of truth as a value or fact as a value in how we understand reality. Anybody who contributed to the degradation of that is guilty of a grievous sin, and Trump is, and the people around Trump are, and all of that. But, he turned out to be kind of a JV athlete in this, and the Democrats turned out to be, Tom Brady for a while. Or maybe better put, like Peyton Manning. Like, they were great until they had to get to the Super Bowl. And then when time came,
Well, this
like
is, I
when they
think,
when they
why.
actually had to close the sale, when everything they
Right.
did had to have the effect of making sure that Trump never became president again. Good work, you guys. You did a fantastic job. Now you're going to all just go pardon yourselves. It's the gaslighting thing is astonishing. They bring up banana republicanism. They behave like politicians in a banana republic, and they help get Trump elected by their behavior. And now they're running screaming for the exits, fearing that they are residents of the banana republic that they may themselves have helped create.
This is why Kash Patel is going to be confirmed as FBI director. I'm serious. I have watched the changing attitudes. I've watched, Susan Collins go, yeah, he's probably all right, or something like that, versus her reaction to others. You try to look at the moderates, the bellwethers, the ones who can actually sink it. Lisa Murkowski, Lisa Murkowski type, right, which is the Susan Collins type, the Republican who will go against them. But they've sort of been Cash seems, yeah, he's probably get confirmed more so than Pete Hegseth, who whose supporters are really fighting for him. And Gates was not defended; he was dropped out immediately. We'll see what happens with RFK. Kash Patel is to Democrats the manifestation of the idea that Trump is that the dark night of fascism is finally descending on the United States of America, right? That's why you got the column in the New York Times this morning. The column is Kash Patel has the enemies list. Trump should pardon everybody on it, right? It's Kash Patel is
Biden,
bringing
yeah,
Biden, excuse me,
yeah,
Biden should
yeah.
pardon everybody on the list. The list is Kash Patel's. So why is Kash Patel not facing more headwinds when we talk about his ability to get confirmed? The answer is because Biden just pardoned his son, and they're talking about the mass pardons. Before Kash Patel says anything, before he gets up in the confirmation hearings and has any confrontations with Democratic senators, the Biden administration is floating mass pardons out of mass hysteria for people. And the stuff that we talked about before, well, we don't know what George Papadopoulos and Mike Flynn, all these guys, Carter Page. So let's manifest the crime, send the FBI to talk to them, and then they'll say something to the FBI that's not truthful, and all apples are red or something, and they will have then committed a crime because we sent the FBI to talk to them. People see this stuff, and I think what they see in Kash Patel is, a kind of bodyguard in a way. They start to sympathize with the idea that Trump wants somebody at the head of the FBI to filter the stuff that comes from below through the FBI, not necessarily because the FBI is going to listen to him and he's going to go arrest everybody, but because Trump doesn't trust the FBI and maybe has reason not to trust the FBI. And Kash Patel is his guy to check every document that comes through and make sure that this isn't continuing under Trump.
The number 3 official at the FBI, Peter Strzok, had a text chain with his mistress in which he said, "Don't worry, we're going to get him." Why should he trust the FBI?
Right.
I mean, I'm just saying, just as a matter of rational fact. Now, my feeling about Kash Patel is aesthetic. I will confess this. Like, I don't know what standing people should have if they're going to run the FBI. I'm not a law enforcement expert, and there are people that I respect in law enforcement and trust. I don't like him because he seems like a kind of unclassy third-rate grifter, selling merch and writing children's books about King Donald and the evil Hillary monster, stuff like that, selling his merch on Steve Bannon's War Room. But, that's me. Like, I like a classier government, but you know what?
And the merch is, we should say the merch
that
is
ship
cash.
has sailed.
The merch is, KSHS, the dollar sign.
Yeah.
He literally uses the cash thing. Yeah.
But I mean, that ship has sailed. If a ship can ever have been said to have sailed, when the man who built Trump Tower became president of the United States, my hopes for a dignified presidency in which, as Kennedy was like raping women in the White House pool, but he had Miroslav Rostropovich playing the cello at the state dinners.
Okay, but I think it's, you can have the sort of taste assessment of someone like Kash Patel, but what worries me is the same thing that worried me about Matt Gaetz, which is a temperamental argument. You can have someone who wants to burn it all down, but then they have to have the temperament where they get some buy-in from the people already in the institution when they understand what kind of undertaking they're having. Patel strikes me as having the temperament of an Instagram influencer, even though his resume is not terrible. I mean, he's actually done
not at all. His resume, absent the stuff that we know that he said on Steve Bannon's War Room and stuff like that. He was a prosecutor. He was a public defender.
Yes.
Okay, all of that.
I mean, he does, but temperamentally, like Matt Gaetz.
Now, people in the White House who worked with him in the Trump White House, there are a bunch of people who really, really, really didn't like him.
Yeah, well, that speaks to
So I
temperament.
mean that's never good. Like
Yeah,
that's that
right.
who are unnerved by his. But again, same problem. Like they probably didn't like Trump either. It's like that again. That ship has sailed. Like we're not the judges. In a funny way, we don't get to be the judges of the temperament. The Senate does.
Right.
Trump does. We elected Trump to
Well,
pick his people.
but
Okay.
that's a better argument for people on the left who want to torpedo every nominee that Trump puts up. It's a better argument to say, look, the guy's resume is fine, but temperamentally, because he's coming into an institution that does need some reform and that does have a lot of turmoil right now, we need someone with a steady hand who understands how to run a large bureaucracy. I mean, that's a legitimate reason to reject someone like Kash Patel, to say he does not seem to have those qualities on his resume, and his reputational management efforts have not helped us get to that point yet. But
Seth, I think,
that's a
makes an
normal
important
political
point.
response, and we're not in normal political
Although
times.
Seth makes, I think, what is a subtle point that I haven't really thought of before, which is that maybe what we're talking about is not burning the place down. Maybe he's there because stuff bubbles up from the Kansas City office saying there's a somebody with a cross on who said something nasty in an online forum about uh, Muslim, and we really need to investigate it. And it gets to the FBI director's desk, and he says, "No, we're not doing that." Someone wants to issue a report that says we really need to focus on this sect in Oregon that isn't paying its taxes, and send 50 agents to surround the compound and make them come out with their hands up. And he says, no, let's not.
Or someone comes and says, this laptop, the contents on this laptop have all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And he says, no, it has all the hallmarks of possible evidence of an American crime.
Right. So in that sense, his job as a gatekeeper could be far more negative than positive. That is to say that stuff bubbles up, innovations, FBI innovations in extending the FBI's mandate, or mandamus, or whatever you want to call it, into finding exotic crimes to investigate, are slowed down by a skeptical central office that would prefer that they go after transnational criminals.
But
Or
he also, I'm sorry to
okay.
interrupt, but he also has to have the ability to do most of what the FBI does. Like, for example, figure out why a guy got assassinated in the middle of Manhattan yesterday. I mean, so most of what the FBI does isn't political and shouldn't be political. We tend to talk most about the politically adjacent cases, but it's a crime fighting organization, and there's a hell of a lot for them to be doing fighting crime that isn't at all adjacent to any political argument. And he's got to have the buy-in of the people in that department to do that job well. And the American people want that job done well.
Right. But again, everything that we know about what has made the FBI controversial pretty much over the last 20 years involves extending our understanding of what crime fighting is, which is
Yes.
like somebody went and shot somebody, you go find them. Somebody kidnapped somebody, that's immediately rises to the level. You go find them, you arrest them, you throw them, you take them to federal court, and you make sure they don't do it to anybody else. It's not create a new category of hate crime. It's not create a new category of criminal. It's not create a new investigative task force to look into things to see whether or not we can characterize them as federal crimes so that we can go after them.
This is where the left tells on themselves by the accusations they're making about Patel, because their fear is that Trump will do what they did with the FBI, which is make political criminal prosecution decisions in the way that the left has done through the FBI, as you say, for almost a decade now.
There's a parallel there with the way the left freaks out over conservative court nominees, because they think conservative court nominees are going to be activist judges the way they are on the left. And it's never the case at all.
I mean,
nobody ever wonders how Sonia Sotomayor is going to vote in big cases.
Right.
But you don't know how John Roberts is going to vote.
I just think that, that they are telling on themselves, and that Trump should be sitting here not believing his luck. I mean, he is the luckiest man of our time. I think it's fair to say. I mean, he went through extraordinarily difficult, the periods in court, 5 cases at the same time, and all of that. And if you think that he's a bad guy, an evil guy, and he's a sexual assault guy, and all, you think he's like escaped, and he's a demon, and he's escaped it. But he is the luckiest guy of our time for various reasons. And no one is luckier than he and his enemies. Did we expect that he would be sitting here at the beginning of December with Biden collapsing what tiny little bit left of his credibility he would have with this pardon? Like, at least he could have waited until the 19th of January. Clinton destroyed his reputation going out the door, but he did wait until the day before he left office to pardon Mark Rich and his own brother and whoever else it was he pardoned. Pardons are very dangerous for people's reputations, and as I said yesterday, and the way that they talk about him, and they talk about giving themselves special things to escape Trump's wrath, is just like an astounding political gift. Again, it creates this notion that they cannot be trusted with power because they abuse it. They say that Trump's going to abuse it. Then he doesn't really abuse it. He says what he wants to do. Then they take him to court. Some things he gets through, some things he doesn't get through. Some parts of the Muslim ban are, the Muslim ban is thrown out, but his right to enforce immigration law under the 1952 National Security Act is affirmed by the Supreme Court, which apparently liberals didn't expect, since I don't know why. They just don't read legislation that says pretty plainly who has the right to enforce immigration law at borders in the United States. They keep giving him, they keep saying that he's going to do things that end up not happening, but they do them. And then he can say that they're doing them, and then they try to hide it. I mean, I watched Susan Glasser of The New Yorker, a particularly infelicitous representative, let us say, of the liberal worldview, outside, if you are not a total partisan of the liberal worldview, on Morning Joe this morning, explaining that one of the reasons that people really think this is necessary is that, there are a lot of people on the left, liberals, people who work for this government, write for the press and all that. And, they love this country, and they really feel like they belong here, and they're citizens, and they don't want to have to go to Canada. They don't want to have to go to Canada, and they may have to go to Canada, and so they need a pardon so they don't have to go to Canada. And I listen to that, and I think, how many times a week are you seeing a therapist? Do you understand what is coming out of your mouth? Do you hear what you are saying? That the entire structure of guilt and innocence and rule of law should be overthrown because you're afraid that somebody might throw the book at you because you wrote an article in the New Yorker that Donald Trump didn't like? Like, A, get a backbone. B, don't take yourself so seriously. And C, as Val Kilmer says in Real Genius, there are many decaffeinated brands that are just as tasty as the caffeinated.
Okay, but this is an important point, because on the media side of this, remember how much a lot of prestige media figures enjoyed cosplaying courage during the first Trump term. And they missed that during Biden. During Biden, they actually had to be house cats. You know, it's like we had to be calm and just purr and really not say much and have them forget to call us on the card, even though our name and picture was on the card at the press conference. And suddenly they get to be courageous again. And not only are they courageous, they're going to be detained. I mean, they might be political prisoners, John. And the weird sort of vanity that this fuels is, it's really interesting to watch who succumbs to it immediately, and we will watch over the next 4 years who becomes this way. And that's why they're also so mad at the Morning Joe crew, because they just kind of threw up their hands and like, our ratings are in the toilet, we got to do something, let's just go bend the knee. So I think the media vanity is back, but it's not going to play the same way, because that industry is in dire straits financially. Like, they need a new business model. Trump will revive them briefly, but it's not going to be like the heyday of that first term.
No, and also, by the way, since that first term, the continued explosive growth of alternative media has yes. really continues to threaten to dwarf mainstream talking heads and reporters.
Right, and Democrats are trying to figure out a way to capitalize on that and follow in the right footsteps. We've had this before, right, with talk radio. We had the fairness doctrine and the fights over how much airtime, Republicans or conservatives or non-liberals should be able to get. And then you had the development of alternative media. You had talk radio, and Rush was the most successful at really sort of changing the landscape at that. And then you had what was the liberal attempt?
Air America.
Air America. And then you had Air America with Senator Franken and
pre-Senator Franken.
Pre-Senator Franken and Rachel Maddow. That was where she got her big break, wasn't it? So
Jeanine
Garofalo, right. Remember this? Barely, because it was not a success. And so now you have this whole podcast thing, right? And Gabby Deutsch in Jewish Insider the other day had a pretty good story about how Democrats have been trying to find their podcast mojo, or progressives, I should say, young Gen Z progressives trying to find their podcast mojo. And so they've glommed onto this Hassan Piker character who is on Twitch and has a ton of followers, and also happens to be kind of a raging anti-Semite. He spends a lot of his time baiting Jews on these shows, but they love him, and they think that, look at the audience he has, we can pursue that audience. And so you're seeing, again, this is a sort of, the Democrats are not shoring up the mainstream media model that they had, that was supposed to be a built-in advantage for them. They're saying, let it fall. We'll follow the podcast. We'll find our own Joe Rogan. Forget about, needing the New York Times. And in the end, they're going to have neither, because they don't have a Joe Rogan, because they're not, alternative media.
35 years ago, when Rush Limbaugh emerged, the AM band was going the way of the dodo. It was failing. The sound quality was bad. The only people who listened to it were like long distance truckers, because, the signal could go for 150, 200 miles and FM couldn't do that. The fairness doctrine was lifted. Rush Limbaugh was a radio guy in Kansas City, came to New York. He went to WABC and said, you know what, I'll do a show for you for free if I can syndicate it. You just let me have the studio space, and I'll try to sell it into other markets, and created this entire industry, or rebirthed this entire industry. Against Rush Limbaugh, and then the people who followed him, were CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, NPR, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Associated Press, the United Press International, Time, Newsweek, every other form of news entertainment on the planet. And within 2 years of Rush Limbaugh finally getting paid attention to, and I say this with pride, I'm going to brag and would name drop, I published the first articles in Washington, in the Washington Times, about the phenomenon of Rush Limbaugh. Randall Blomquist, who wrote a column for the Washington Times on the radio, said, there's this guy, he's on WMAL. He's tripling everybody's ratings. We got to pay attention to him. We started publishing, writing about him. No one was writing about him anywhere else in the country. Literally. I mean, this was a sotto voce phenomenon. So finally, in like 1994, searching for an explanation for how on earth the Republicans win the House back, suddenly Democrats are like, we've got to do something. We need a Rush Limbaugh. Got to do something. There was one Rush Limbaugh. 70 million people a day watched the networks. Do you understand what I'm saying? 70 million people a day. 10 million people reading the classic mainstream press. One medium, one voice, one place in America had a dominating conservative voice. And Limbaugh was a different voice from the one he became over time. He was cheerful. He was optimistic. He was pro-American. He was pro-entrepreneurial. He was kind of a, what would you call it? Like almost like a motivational speaker, talking about how you can
very
get
funny
anything
at
done.
times back
He
then.
was funny. He was politically incorrect. And this was deemed unacceptable because you weren't supposed to be able to have anything that broke through any of that noise. So the idea was, we need him because everything we have isn't good enough. Now, it's not all that different. The problem is that the size of the mainstream media is probably reasonably the same in percentage terms as it was then. It's that there is no mainstream media anymore in that sense. Everything is the mainstream media or nothing is the mainstream media. If Steve Bannon can get 20 million listeners a day and NPR can get 20 million listeners a day, the gatekeeping has broken down.
It's better to call it legacy media.
Legacy media. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say one thing about this and Seth's point about the left sort of trying to follow the right into the alternative medium. What the left has is TikTok. And how has that worked out for them, right? They have a bunch of kids or adults acting like kids, acting crazy, spreading nonsense, and having no political impact ultimately when it comes to election time. There was all this. The Biden team were trying to get the whole influencer thing, the TikTok thing going. Good luck.
Right, they were talking about shutting it down at the same time that
exactly,
they were announcing they were opening a campaign account on it, right?
Right.
But the central point here is that this world depends on the idea that while through most of my adult life, the notion is the right is intolerant and won't listen to anybody else and wants to suppress views it doesn't like and wants to throw gays in jail and do all that. They cannot bear the existence of voices that are not their own. Now, we all have that problem, right? We do. Like, you get really angry when somebody writes something you don't agree with or something like that. But I mean, there is a kind of mania to this that is fascinating.
Isn't that what's happening with Bluesky? Isn't that the whole Bluesky phenomenon?
Is it actually called Bluesky?
No.
Okay, you're calling it Bluesky.
I'm calling it Bluesky. But the blue sky phenomenon, isn't that what's happening? Aren't we watching that in real time? The migration to a new medium that they can sort of control and monitor.
And that's fine, by the way. If it works, it works. If Blue Sky can take some of the audience of Twitter and have a sort of secondary Twitter market, Twitter deserves to have competition.
Sure.
If Twitter does move too far to the right and alienates a large audience on the left, then maybe somebody can take advantage of that and force Elon Musk to moderate a little bit because he'll want to have the largest platform. No one should have any problem with that.
I mean, ideally, we just want some of these, whether it's a social media platform or a government institution. I think most people, not to make the normie case, but most people just want a place that works because so much of their lives now feel like things don't work. And so I wouldn't argue that. I mean, I think competition in the social media space is absolutely vital, important, and good. And one of the things that people who aren't, crazy left wing who go to Blue Sky like a lot of the controls that community gives them about who to mute, who they can listen to. And there is more content moderation on that platform than there is on Twitter. And that's, for some people, that's what they prefer. But I think we should just want institutions that generally work, that are as apolitical as possible. And you do obviously have, control by one party or the other in our various elected positions. But that the affective polarization, the fact that the most extremely entrenched people on both sides seem to control the conversation in so many realms, not just political, but also cultural and social, is what people got sick of. I think it's why Trump is back in office. It's that weird middle of normal people who are like, just stop.
Yeah,
I don't know. I consider myself one of those people in some regards.
This is a related point, John. You said that the left and liberals, they can't tolerate a difference of opinion, and then you said, well, we're all kind of like that. We get mad when we read something we disagree with. But I think there's a stark difference between conservatives and liberals on this, in that I only get intolerant when the opinion that opposes mine is oppressively everywhere and you can't escape it. And then I start feeling like, this is North Korea. I'm thinking of 8 years of Obama, for example, when you were living in a snow dome of, liberal messaging. And so I think conservatives have a tougher skin when it comes to opposing opinions, because they've had to. And
there's no question.
It's
Look,
worked
there's
to
no
their
question
benefit.
about that, and it's also part of our internal dynamic that we know that we're succeeding if they insult us, or we know that we're getting to them when they say we're evil, and so we must be doing something right because of the way they respond to us, or something like that. But I think an ultimate thing about we need a Joe Rogan is, you don't need a Joe Rogan. Podcasting is a medium. It's like it's one of 10. It's a medium. It's like a communicate. We have it. Joe Rogan has it. Pod Save America has it. NPR and the New York Times have podcasts that are in the top 10. Ben Shapiro has one. Jonah Goldberg. Everybody's got a podcast. It's just a medium. It's just a way of transmitting something. They have all of these transmission points. If they could incept a star at MSNBC who didn't shave her head and insult gay people, and then say somebody hacked her account and then told people to throw their families out at Thanksgiving time for saying something nice about Trump, who somehow got a Harvard degree in 1991. God knows. I would love to see Joy Reid's doctoral, her bachelor thesis. That would be fun. That would be a fun read. But I was just going to say, like, they could just put someone in that slot and get 25 million viewers. If that person had something to say to people that people wanted to see, they got access to everything. They got CNN. They got the New York Times. They can do anything and get 100 million people to listen. People don't want to listen to what they're saying. People want to listen to what Joe Rogan is saying. There's no technical means to improve that.
There's a reason they can't get a Joe Rogan in any case. I don't like Joe Rogan. I have a lot of problems with Joe Rogan, but the right doesn't have a Joe Rogan. That's the wrong way to think of it.
Right.
Joe Rogan presents as a sort of apolitical guy who's talking to people. And if he lands on the right side of an issue, it's because, in his thinking, he's just using common sense. There's no similar phenomenon on the left, right? So you can't have a Joe Rogan on the left because you're infused with the politics of it. You can't really, quote, have a Joe Rogan on the right either. So they're not going to get one.
And this was always true. The breakout stars, maybe with the exception of Limbaugh, again, though PC was a very important, being anti-PC was a very important element of his rise. But if you start with your beloved Howard Stern, move on to Bill O'Reilly, move on to Keith Olbermann before he went totally off the rails, Tucker before he went totally off the rails. These guys are not conventional partisans. Hannity was the conventional partisan, you know. Stephanopoulos was the conventional partisan who went.
Hannity's first show was a Hannity and Colmes, where he had a guy on the left and he was on the right, and they would debate. I mean, even he was not like, you know, he started out
right. But I'm saying he was very much the representative of the Republican view, or whatever it was at that moment. These guys transcended. They were populists. They were Trump avant la lettre. They what they were interested in was, who is screwing the little guy? Why does your life suck? Who's making your life suck? And that was Howard Stern, who was like feminists and, I don't know, cops who pulled you over just for having 3 beers in your car. And
Howard was very pro cop.
Okay, fair enough. I'm sorry. I'm not gonna. I'm just saying, he was not. He was an anti-liberal then, but he wasn't a conservative. And O'Reilly was a populist, and Glenn Beck was a populist. And these sensations that arose in neo media did not conform to these bands that people think they do. And that's when they say they want a Joe Rogan, what they mean is they would like 100 million, 190 million downloads a month. Yeah. No, they want 190 million downloads a month in which they can pour out democratic talking points into people's ears and have them accept them uncritically.
But this is interesting because I think there's something here about the tolerance level on the right versus the left for cultural, independent-minded people. So a lot of the people we've just listed would maybe be called populist, but also perhaps libertarian. And conservatism, I mean, it's failing at this a little bit in the Trump era where there were more purity tests, but conservatism's big tent allowed for a lot of that and still really does. The left has grown increasingly more self-policing with regard to litmus testing its various factions. And if you are that kind of, Joe Rogan, you know, has a lot of positions that used to conform to the old school Democratic Party, but now he's stayed in the same place. It's the party that's moved away. So I wonder if, and also even the cultural stuff has now all become political, which I think is a central problem here. But we actually did have on the conservative side more of a Big Tent. It doesn't mean that the traditional country club Republicans liked what always liked Rush Limbaugh's style either. You know, they thought he was a little brash and crude, and they didn't like the phrase feminazis and all this stuff. But he was still allowed in the tent, and I think that's changed a lot on the left side of the aisle.
And a key part of that phenomenon, right, is that as soon as you express one heterodox opinion, you are coded as right wing. They are doing this to themselves, right? Joe Rogan, the right didn't claim Joe Rogan as right wing. The left decided Joe Rogan was right wing, right? Bill Maher is really angering a lot of people on the left these days, right? With his stance on Israel and some of the other stuff. And of course, the political correctness and the woke stuff, right? Bill Maher is not a right-wing political figure, but you in the left universe, when you do that, if you have some opinion that becomes prominently associated with you, and it is heterodox, it is right-wing. And so they've pushed all these popular guys in a way over to the right. You know, like Abe is right to say right doesn't have a Joe Rogan, but if the right does have a Joe Rogan, it's because the left gave them a Joe Rogan, right? The left sort of created this dynamic, in other words, in which things get attributed to being right-wing or conservative that don't think of themselves that way. And then they get jealous of the supposed existence of all these popular.
It's the same gaslighting. We're right back where we started. They talk themselves into the idea that the things that are, you know, that are telling on them are illegitimate, and then they either want them or they want to destroy them, and then they don't understand what caused them in the first place, and they only make it worse for themselves when they attempt to respond, which I have to close. I was not expecting to do this, but since we went in this way and went into this conversation, there is the commentary recommends that I have to make. I've never done this before. I don't think I will ever do it again. But there is the seminal book on the topic of what happens when you are somebody who was a liberal who then stops being a liberal, and then what happens to them among everybody that they know and the experience that they go through. And that is a book called Breaking Ranks, and is by my father, Norman Podhoretz, published in 1979, a man of unimpeachable left liberal credentials, published this influential magazine called Commentary that was one of the first voices against the Vietnam War, and took a fairly radical view on race relations and various other things. And then as the 1960s went on and the left turned increasingly anti-American in its opposition to the war in Vietnam, and anti-American in terms of the changes in mood about race and crime and things like that, and moves against Jews in New York City and elsewhere, with the vanguard of the explosion of anti-Semitism that we see now, almost 60 years later. And my father wrote this second autobiography, which is about his experience becoming an outcast in the community of people in which he was not only a leader, but in which he had all of his friends, all of his companions, all of his intellectual lodestars, everybody that he lived with and dealt with. It's a great American autobiography, and it tells this story the way no other book has ever told that story. So that is the commentary recommends at the end of the week.
There is a wonderful moment in his I think it's in Why Are Jews Liberal, one of his later books, but when he describes when commentary was still part of the AJC, when it still had a financial
the American Jewish Committee,
American Jewish Committee, Norman describes how, at the annual dinner, he gave up and gave a speech as the editor of Commentary, which was, some in some ways a sort of house organ or whatever. If an AJC dinner, the Commentary editor would get up and speak. And it was during the time where there was all this, the new left had, was up and coming, and all the upheaval was with the schools and education. And he stood up and he gave his speech, and it was during this period of transition where it wasn't clear where everyone was going to end up. And so he describes like the room not knowing how to respond to his, he's at his organization's annual dinner. He's a major figure in this organization. He gets up and he gives the speech, and people are sort of looking at each other like, I mean, I kind of agree with a lot of that, but I'm not supposed to, right? The education stuff is like, there was no warning. There was no prepping the ground for people at this AJC dinner to expect what he was saying about education and the way things are changing. And they literally didn't know how to respond to his speech. And that was, at a moment when I think he describes it as a sort of moment when people then understood that things were moving in a very particular direction and they were not going to move back in a different direction. But that's one of my favorite things that he describes of this change, of what happens when you present to people ideas that they do agree with, but are not supposed to publicly agree with, and you put them on the spot. How do you handle being faced with that sort of challenge?
Yeah, one of the things he describes in the book, and then we can go, is how, as he was altering his political views and saying he did not believe that, North Vietnam was a country of equal virtue to the United States, and Cuba was a totalitarian country, and Israel was under unjust assault from very left-wing sources, that more than one friend of his wrote to my mother and suggested that he be institutionalized because he had clearly had a terrible nervous collapse and should go off to Austin Riggs and maybe get a lobotomy or, electroconvulsive therapy or something, because he had clearly only a crazy person could have these views. This is a real thing. I mean, I've read these letters myself, so I can just tell you, and they were very loving, by the way. They weren't like, you better get him into a place because,
There you go. More in sorrow than in anger, I'm sure.
Oh, no, fear, terrible. It's grief, sorrow that, oh, what a great mind is here o'erthrown, as someone says of King Lear. Anyway, that's Breaking Ranks by my dad, Norman Podhoretz. And we will be back on Monday. So for Christine, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.